Hi, everybody.
What's that?
Oh, yes, Roseanne wanted me to remind you to please fill out your door prize entry sheets. We have a lot of great prizes. I've already filled out 14, so I have my eye on a few prizes there myself. So, my name is Jeff Stauffer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Elville Center for the Creative Arts, which I'm very humbled to be. I'm also the Community Relations Director for Elville and Associates. So I could talk about this for about 2 hours, but I'm not going to. I have about 4 or 5 minutes, so I want to get started with this. If my clicker is going to work, let me see here. Hold on 1 second. There we go, that's helpful. So first of all, I want to thank a couple of donors that are in the audience for the Elville Center for the Creative Arts. We have Mr. Bob Slattery and his family. He's raising his hand right there. And Gwen and Alex Rolfe. Without donors, the Elville Center simply wouldn't work. So we really appreciate the donors that help make our vision a reality. And talking a little bit about the Elville Center's beginnings, we were founded on June 30th, 2014 by Mr. Stephen Elville, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, and we partner with businesses such as the classical music station 91.5 WBJC, Music and Arts, schools, the Columbia Orchestra, thank you very much, as well as the Annapolis Orchestra, and other nonprofits to provide musical instruments, supplies, music lessons, and participation in a lot of music-related activities for children all over the state of Maryland. And our mission is to improve the quality of life of children of all ages by providing them the opportunity to learn music theory and application and experience cultural events related to the musical and creative arts, and to use music and promotion of music-related activities to transcend social and economic divisions. And it all started with a vision and a phone call from a student. And this young man, Daniel Coleman, is one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my entire life. When he was an 8th grader at Benjamin Tasker Middle School in Bowie, this enterprising young man, who is now a sophomore at Central High School, he heard about us on WBJC and called us and said, my school needs instruments. And this guy right now, he's an Eagle Scout who's going to be getting his Eagle Scout accreditation in April. I just talked to his mom yesterday. We interviewed him for the Elville Center for an interview montage that we're going to be putting on video over the next few months. And he's been a big supporter of the Elville Center. We're helping to pay for his violin lessons that he's taking on a monthly basis. So this young man got us really started on our venture a few years ago. We are recognized throughout the state of Maryland. So we're small, but we're growing day by day. We're heard on WBJC. We're supported by Music and Arts in the Band Shop. We're recognized by Bach in Baltimore, the Columbia Orchestra, the Annapolis Symphony Orchestra, the Kendall Lake Concert Society. We received the Children's Home 2016 Annual Community Service Award, and we've had articles written about us in large magazines such as Maryland Super Lawyers 2017. So what we normally do, and this is the real crux of our work, is we visit with schools' music directors to learn about and understand what their needs are, and their needs are very great. The music directors that we visit with, they develop wish lists, which are typically about 3 or 4 pages long, as you can probably imagine, of items that they need that would benefit their schools' music programs. And they include repairs to their existing instrument inventory, needs for refurbished instruments to fill the gaps in their inventory, new sound system cases that are broken that they need repaired or replaced, supplies, funding for field trips, and much, much more. And then what we do is we get to work. We fulfilled needs on the program's wish list incrementally. And these are just some pictures of some of our deliveries. Benjamin Tasker Middle School, we had a huge delivery to them a few years ago, and that's Daniel as a young boy. He's grown up a lot. I still have a lot of gray hair. The Children's Home Partnership, which has been a wonderful partnership. The Children's Home is a place in Catonsville for children that have had some disruption in their lives due to family issues. It's been one of our great partnerships. George B. Cromwell, I'm not going to read this quote, but I think it says it all right here. This young lady, Carol Cox, she is just such a dear. When I come in with instruments, I feel kind of like Santa Claus. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. Everybody says it's kind of like a holiday type experience when we come in to make those deliveries. The students and the teachers, they just say it just makes their week and month when we come in with all these instruments and supplies for them. And it really just makes such a huge difference in how they can make their program work. Lastly, or I think second to last, here's a resident at the Children's Home in Catonsville recording an original song at the Song Builder Studio in Catonsville. So that's something that we are helping to fund for them. So children are going to record their own original music at a professional studio. This is a delivery we made to New Era Academy in Baltimore. We gave them a Fender guitar, a state-of-the-art sound system with speakers, lots of instruments, including a piano we had donated from a donor to benefit their program. Everything is not rosy, though. There's lots of challenges. There's a severe lack of funding in school music programs, most notably in the city, which we work with a lot. So we have many success stories, but the need in our programs outweigh the funding that we have. So your support is really needed greatly. We have a lot of new initiatives going on right now. The Howard County Autism Society, we're partnering with them to develop a music program for the children that they have there with autism. So research has shown that music and music therapy can be very therapeutic for those children. Coppin Academy High School, this is a charter school that has lots of needs. We're working on refurbishing about 40 of their instruments, giving them new instruments. We donated a piano to them. The Annapolis Symphony Orchestra, we're going to be a major sponsor of them this year. We're sending kids to concerts in Annapolis for them. We're providing the tickets and bus transportation. You can read more about our initiatives in our upcoming newsletter as well. And with your help, we can make more of these pictures happen. The joy of receiving your very first band instrument. I think this is just such a great picture. So I want to thank you guys for your time. Any questions, reach out to Steve or me by email. We're available afterwards to talk. And I want to thank you in advance for your support. So thank you very much. So I want to transition. We're going to have some more music from the amazing Riversdale Chamber Ensemble. I want to more formally introduce them now. On violin, we have Brenda Anna. She is concert master. Brenda Anna, who attended the Peabody Conservatory of Johns Hopkins University, where she studied with Young Koo Ahn, Charles Libov, and David Geber of the American String Quartet. She currently serves as concert master of the Columbia Orchestra and is a member of the National Philharmonic. In addition, Brenda is a busy freelance performer in the Baltimore, Washington area. She currently serves, Ms. Anna has performed as soloist with many local orchestras and teaches in her private studio. She also is a member of the faculty of Princeton Chamber Music Play Week in Lexington, Virginia, a summer program for adult amateur chamber musicians. We also have Paul Lee on violin, He has been a member of the Columbia Orchestra since 2001. Currently, he is also the concertmaster of the Howard County Ballet Orchestra and studies the violin under Won-Ju Kim of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. A mathematician by training, Paul now works as a researcher at a computer security firm in Baltimore. He is also involved in designing and maintaining the Columbia Orchestra's website. Finally, Jason Love, he is the conductor and cellist who leads the Columbia Orchestra in his 19th year as music director, the fourth person to have held that post in its 40 seasons. Praised for his, quote, intelligent and innovative programming, the Baltimore Sun has called the orchestra, quote, Howard County's premier ensemble for instrumental music. Love was artistic director of the Greater Baltimore Youth Orchestras for 13 years and music director of the New Horizons Chamber Ensemble for 5. A highly respected educator, Love has also guest conducted a wide variety of ensembles, including Ruckus, a contemporary music ensemble at UMBC, where he taught conducting for 7 years. As a cellist, Mr. Love has performed a wide array of concertos. His many chamber recitals include work with the Columbia Orchestra Piano Trio, featuring concertmaster Brenda Anna and pianist Nancy Smith. He has adjudicated and guest conducted at music festivals around the country. So I'll turn it back over to the Riversdale Chamber Ensemble.
we're gonna move from Bach to Cole Porter and play Anything Goes for you. Another popular piece that actually crosses the line between popular and classical music comes from George Gershwin's opera Porgy and Bess. So we'll play Summertime for you. So you have the downbeat. enjoyed that. We're going to play several movements from the Handel's Fireworks Suite to wind up our performance here. If any of you are in the area tomorrow and looking for something fun to do on a rainy day, come over to St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church off of Route 216. And you can hear Jason and Nancy Smith, our pianist, and I play a trio recitals. Admission is free. Donations are happily accepted if you wish to donate to the orchestra, and it should be a nice way to spend the day. What's the number?
White 11.
11, thank you.
Right on. There's 3 short white ones.
It's just three minutes. Okay, so I'm sorry, the movements we're going to be playing, we'll be playing a beret, then what's the next one?
Minuet and La Réjouissance.
Oh, there it is, yeah. Beret, Minuet, and La Réjouissance.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Truly wonderful. Truly wonderful. They'll be back for our first break to give us a little bit more entertainment. So we look forward to that. Two brief items. First of all, I was remiss. I had 3 people come up to me and ask me how they could donate to the Elville Center. So in just 20 seconds, during the break, they came up to me. You can go online to donate if you wanted to support us monetarily, or you can write checks or cash or foreign currency. We take everything. Or if you have an old instrument, you can drop it off at our office, or I make house calls too. So I will come to you, and it'll be put to good use very quickly. So thank you very much. And also, Roseanne wanted me to remind you that this is the last call to fill out your door prize entry form. So thank you very much. I want to go ahead and introduce our first 2 guest speakers. We have Jan Wood, who is the president of the Anne Arundel Medical Center Foundation and Chief Development Officer for Anne Arundel Medical Center. She is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the foundation, as well as strategic and programmatic goals. Jan joined the foundation in 2010 as Director of Major Gifts. In July 2013, she was promoted to Chief Development Officer. Before joining AAMC, Jan owned a marketing consulting firm in Annapolis, providing fundraising strategies and event planning, public relations, market analysis, and business development. She was Public Relations Director and then Vice President of Marketing for several Maryland corporations, as well as serving as the owner and principal of a 23-member advertising and marketing firm and a national consulting firm. Her career includes work for an array of nonprofit organizations, such as Davis Memorial Goodwill Industries of Washington, D.C., Hospice of the Chesapeake, Maryland Society for Sight, Wellness House of Annapolis, and numerous private educational institutions in Maryland. A native of Baltimore, Jan holds a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Bachelor of Science in Journalism Public Relations from the University of Maryland, College Park. Go Terps. She is a 1997 graduate of Leadership Anne Arundel, is a 2010 YWCA Twin honoree, and was named the 2015 Top 100 Women in Maryland. Jan served on numerous boards of directors, including YWCA of Anne Arundel County, Anne Arundel Medical Center, Annapolis Walk for the Cure, Annapolis Wellness House, Leadership Anne Arundel, Annapolis and Anne Arundel Chamber of Commerce, Chesapeake Academy, and Hospice of the Chesapeake. And we have Barbara Jacobs. Barbara Jacobs, RN, joined Anne Arundel Medical Center as Chief Nursing Officer in 2015. Barbara came to AAMC from Johns Hopkins Suburban Hospital in Bethesda, where she served as the Chief Nursing Officer. With almost 40 years of nursing experience, Barbara began her career in New Brunswick, New Jersey, where she quickly rose up the ranks from new nursing graduate to Assistant Director of Nursing. She continued to develop her clinical skills as a staff nurse in hospitals in Camden, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. She held progressive leadership positions at George Washington University Hospital as a charge nurse and nursing supervisor, interim chief nurse officer, and the director of critical care. She is certified in gerontological and critical care nursing and has experience in cardiothoracic critical care. As chief nursing officer, Barbara works with nursing staff and nurse leaders, physician and multidisciplinary team members, auxilians, and patient and family advisors to continue building on important nursing initiatives, patient satisfaction, and well-being. She also leads the refinement and implementation of the nursing strategic plan. Barbara received her Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the University of Rochester and a Master of Science in Nursing and Management from George Washington University. Last month, Barbara received national recognition for reaching a significant milestone in the nursing profession. She is one of 521 critical care registered nurses being honored this year by the Certification Organization for the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. CCRN certification is one of the most advanced professional credentials that can be achieved by a nurse in the field of acute and critical care. As a result, the CCRN credential is highly regarded as recognition of advanced knowledge and clinical expertise in the care of acutely and critically ill patients and their families. Miss Wood and Miss Jacobs, everyone.
You now know more about me than my mother does. Good morning. My name is Jan Wood, and I am the Chief Development Officer at Anne Arundel Health System. Some of you may have remembered Anne Arundel Medical Center as that nice little hospital down by the water with about 100 beds many years ago. Today, we're a 400-bed health system with our main campus on Jennifer Road in Annapolis, but with facilities from Easton all the way through West County, down into South County and Southern Anne Arundel County, and all the way up into Pasadena. We also have a 40-bed addiction treatment center on Riva Road, and are in the process of building a new mental health hospital on that same campus that will happen in the next 2 years. The reason that we're here today is not just because we're nice people, but because Anne Arundel Health System happens to be the only hospital in Maryland that has a dedicated acute care for the elderly unit. This is actually an area of care in which we specialize and are nationally known for. We were recently selected as one of 5 hospitals to help develop a special age-friendly health system model that hospitals throughout the United States will be able to use on how to care for our aging population. As you know, our baby boomers are getting older, and they are going to be the biggest tidal wave that the healthcare system has ever seen. And so the impact that we're all going to have on the health system is really throughout the country and throughout this region is very important. Caring for elderly adults is very different than caring for other patients. And so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague who, as you've heard, is truly an expert in this area, talk to you about some of the things that we're doing and setting the stage for other hospitals to do throughout the country in care for the elderly, and then open it up and answer your questions, and we'll have some materials for you to take home.
Hello there, and we certainly got wonderful introductions. But I spent, and now I've crossed 40 years. This was my 40th year in nursing, and spent the vast majority of that at the critical care end, at the running ICUs. I did trauma for many years, open heart for many years. But about 7 years ago, I moved out of the city hospitals. I was always in the city teaching hospitals, and moved to a community hospital. And it was a suburban hospital in Bethesda. And when I got there, I noticed, these patients. Oh, thanks. These patients look old. And so we ran demographics and confirmed they are old. Because if you think of a place like Bethesda, or probably the areas that you live, people are educated. They have access to health care, and we were evidence in Bethesda that if you're educated and have access to health care, you can live a long time. And so at that point, I realized that I was used to seeing populations in the city that were coming into trauma units and coming into ICUs that frequently had made what I called poor lifestyle choices very early in their life. So we were seeing people with multiple illnesses in their 30s and 40s, but we really didn't see that in the community hospitals. And so I decided that I really needed to, although I have my critical care certifications and have maintained those, that being certified in gerontologic nursing was really the future of what we will be. This is the population we will be taking care of in hospitals. There's something like, I think it is 1 in every 6 seconds in the United States, somebody's turning 65. And if you make it to 65, you've got a good chance of living another 24 years. So the ages of patients that we're seeing in the hospitals that are coming in living at home and jogging and going to exercise classes into their 80s and 90s is increasingly, we're seeing more and more of these patients. But one of the things that I wanted you guys to hear about is something that we have developed a real passion for this year, and it's something called the Conversation Project. And this, I'll talk to you about why it's important to us, and how I hope that you guys, that some of you in this room will listen to and we're going to hand you out some material about the Conversation Project, and we'll take this home and as a gift to your children, or as a gift to your family, follow through with the conversation project. Because what we find in the hospitals, I'm suspecting that most of the people in this room have filled out an advance directive at some point. If you're coming to a talk like this, you probably know that that's important. But so you come to the hospital and you have an advance directive, and you wrote this advance directive 15 years ago. Nobody can quite find it, but somebody finds it and brings it in, and what it says to us is, if this patient has a terminal illness and two physicians agree that I don't want to have life-sustaining, extraordinary care given. Well, there's a big range about what a terminal disease is. Is Alzheimer's a terminal disease? Is a devastating stroke that's going to leave you in a bed, unable to communicate with anybody and respond to your environment at all, is that a terminal disease? And so if we have not gone that next degree, the advance directive does not help us much. It actually doesn't. The other piece of the advance directive is, many times we've gone to fill this out, we've done the will, we've done the advance directive, we're with the spouse, we name the spouse to be the person who's going to speak for me, and the spouse is really not the right person to speak for me. Because the emotional part of making these decisions when you're confronted in an emergency room is that the person is not capable of making the decision, these tough decisions of what is the right thing to do for your care. So I thought I was writing down some scenarios. So this is like a patient scenario of what we might see and what we see frequently. Now these are made up patients, but they could be real. So Sandy and Peter have been married for 62 years. Peter's been retired for nearly 20 years and has an excellent pension and savings that allows them to live well and travel. They have made it clear to their children, who do not live locally, that they want to live at home and will not consider an alternative solution. And the children let that end the conversation. So the parents say, I want to live at home, and that's it, and we won't talk about anything else. Sandy has had a few small strokes, and that's affected her short-term memory, especially when she's tired. However, Peter took care of all the bills and major decisions, and it started helping around the house also, and so they were able to cope at home. Now Peter has been diagnosed with a rapidly progressive Parkinson's disease, and it makes him unable to drive, and he walks unsteadily. Today he's fallen. It looks like he has a hip fracture. The children have been called, and they gather from around the country in the hospital and are presented with decisions to make. It's apparent as soon as they get in the home that their parents are not safe in the home any longer. And although this is an educated, family that has resources, the family is totally unprepared to make decisions on what has to happen. Another scenario, Phil is a 68-year-old attorney, partner in a large DC firm. He is divorced and remarried for 5 years with adult children from his first marriage. He's devoted to his children who have not fully embraced the new wife. He has a will in place and an advance directive making his new wife his decision maker, but he's never really talked to the children at all about what he would want. He didn't even tell before his divorce, his son was his decision maker. Now his new wife is his decision maker. His advance directive speaks to terminal illness and not wanting to live in a persistent vegetative state. But while at work, Bill complains of a terrible headache and collapses. 911 is called, and he's brought to the emergency department where it's discovered that he's had a devastating intracerebral hemorrhage. They're unable to reach family immediately, and so the hospital takes him in for emergency life-saving surgery. But 3 weeks later, Bill is not responding to commands, doesn't recognize family, does occasionally moves one extremity, but shows no sign of having cognitive ability to react to his environment. Decisions need to be made about putting in a tracheostomy and a feeding tube, Bill, as I said, has not communicated anything about his wishes to his children. His wife is confident that he would not want to live this way, but 2 of his children have become born again and believe in the possibility of miracles. And we have World War III going in the midst of the hospital. and so what I just read these scenarios, and these are absolutely these are not real people, but these are stories that we deal with and we deal with every day, where people think they've got themselves kind of organized, but they haven't had the real conversation with their families about what it is that I want if I can no longer make decisions. And if I can't be a part of this family, what is a quality life to me? And so we frequently get then the children or the spouse in a situation where the physicians and the nursing staff are asking you, what do you want us to do? Tell me what to do. Should we do this trach? Should we do this surgery? And the family is like, would your father want to live like this? And the family doesn't know what to say. And the family doesn't, it feels this guilt of, if I say no, that my dad is going to die, and I'm going to be responsible for this decision. So the gift that you guys can make by to your families and to is enormous if you force this conversation. None of us want to have this conversation. And when they look at nationally, about like 85% of us, I think in our brochure it tells us the exact amount, say that it's important to have this conversation. But guess how many people really have the conversation? Yeah, like almost nobody. Or we think we have the conversation like the family who said, we're going to live at home. That's our answer. We're living at home. That's not really having this deeper conversation of what would you want if this happened. Help guide me and give me as your child or as your spouse the answer, so I know what to say when I'm presented with these questions. What happens now with the family that we talked about, the 62-year-old the 62-year married couple who's fallen, and now dad has broken his hip. He's going to have to go into rehab immediately. We cannot transfer you in Maryland to anything outside the hospital, any kind of next level of care, without something called the Maryland Order of Life-Sustaining Treatment, I think MOLST. Have you guys seen, you've had to do it. And if somebody's walking up to you at the last second to say, here it is, fill out this, if you haven't been prepared, because we have to ask you, it's not like we can't, and if we fill it out incorrectly, it is the order of life-sustaining care, telling the next provider what to do when they receive this patient, whether to do CPR or not do CPR, or whether to put in a breathing tube or not. The MOLST is actually thorough enough. There's a mandatory first page, and then there's a secondary page that asks the questions about feeding tubes and fluids and such. But we hit you right at the, because we can't transfer you, so we got to fill this out right there.
I was just going to say, in my case, the physicians were very kind. However, the worst part of the whole thing was acknowledging, in our case, to say DNR. That was, right. It was so hard to say.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's never easy. These are never easy decisions when it's, I can tell you what I do. I'm half hillbilly and half Italian. And I'm the only healthcare worker in both groups. So I get called when anybody collapses in this whole big group. And so what my normal response when I'm talking to a hospital in West Virginia or a hospital in New York or whatever is, with my oldest relatives, is treat them till I get there, but don't do CPR. If the heart stops, don't. But I have an advantage. I've lived in this world way longer. In the medical world, way longer. So I can make that decision easier than when it's like, what is happening? And one of the important things I wanted to talk about too is if a person decides that DNR is appropriate. I'm 92 years old, I have a little bit of cancer, I'm living fine, but if my heart stops, I've got my pacemaker, had 3 stents, now the kidneys are off a little bit, but I'm living okay. But if I'm ready, I do not want to have CPR done, that doesn't mean that we do not treat. One patient said, it doesn't mean do not fix me. So, so if I still need to have something a little bit tweaked or fixed, that doesn't mean that it's the end of care. But these decisions are so hard. So there's a national campaign, actually. We didn't make up this conversation project. And you can go online. There's websites there that show you videos. There is stuff on various TV, reporters who are covering this, and stories of families of how they did this. I have been in this business really for 40 years. I've been at the edge of critical care and trauma where I see this happening all the time. But I said, I haven't completely had this discussion in my family. So at Thanksgiving, by Jacob's side, we're going to have the conversation. I warned the whole group, the 25 or 30 that'll come together, that we're having the conversation project. And at Christmas, the Stewart side, my other side, we're having. Because we need to really get this out here and discuss what it is, what we would want, so that we actually, we're giving a gift to our families when we do this. The burden that comes off, if we can say to a family, let's look at what your dad wanted, or your wife wanted, or your child has told us some of the worst decisions when you have to be making a decision for a child, but what your adult child wanted, or they told you what they want. Yeah.
I come from a large family, Italian.
Oh, yeah.
And the one thing I would say also is, if you're going to tell your children, tell all your children. Because what happens then is if you only tell a few, then those people go, well, Mommy told me. And they go, well, Mom didn't tell me. So now you get back into the fighting, even though the person made their wishes known. Right. Everybody has to be on the same page.
And that's why I purposely talked about this man who talked to his wife, his new wife, sort of, but didn't talk to children. You've got World War III. And it's a terrible where somebody is accusing you of killing my father, or it is a terrible situation. And at the end of life, when it can be a memory that we remember peacefully and positively, that we were there together, it can be a horrible memory for families that they never recover from. So, I truly hope that you guys will look through this little brochure, but force yourself to have that conversation. One of our patient family advisors at Anne Arundel was driving to Busch Gardens or something, and she had her husband in the car, so she said, I had him trapped. He doesn't want to discuss this, but I said we are discussing this right now because I want to make sure that we understand. But again, I keep on saying this is a gift you give your family if you force it. It's a conversation none of us want to have, but it's a gift. And despite the fact, I assure you, the advanced directives help us a little bit, but not that much, because there's so much greatness in the interpretation of what the advanced directive is, that it doesn't help us in the same way that if the family comes in and says, we'll have a patient who has no, maybe only has nieces and nephews, had no children themselves, has had the conversation. Nobody can find the advanced directive when it comes, but the whole group, the nieces and nephews, know that Barbara's the one who's supposed to speak for my aunt. And the hospital can easily transition then to what's appropriate for that this patient wanted, even if we can't find the advanced directive, because this family is together, and we have to do what we think is best, acting in this patient's interest. But any question? Yeah, I wanted to make sure to leave time for questions. Oh, sorry.
In our practice, I ask every client every year if they've gone to the Maryland State website to get the most form, and many do, and most of them don't, or they'll get it and they don't fill it out. The one thing that you keep telling us without saying it is document, document, document. Make sure that the people that need to have it in their hands when they need it.
Right. Absolutely, that you take the time to put it down. Tell them that you've done it. Tell the family I have it. My wishes are down.
Right.
And you do relieve the patient the family of the burden of this enormous decision of saying DNR, and it's huge.
Do y'all know what a MOLST form is? Sometimes we talk hospital speak.
Yeah, I was saying it's that Maryland Order of Life Sustaining Treatment, and it actually was developed first to help EMS, so they get to the house and they don't know what to do. So the MOLST form should be in your home too, easily. But it's transformed into this thing that's a requirement now when there's any interagency transfer. And so it is the order, it is an order, the physician order of what should be done for this patient.
Hi, it sounds like you're suggesting that there be an oral conversation. Oral. But shouldn't something be put in writing and then kept in a safe place?
Yeah. The advanced directive is one, but if you go online, what we find often in the hospitals is people still have their 15-year-old advanced directive. I did it, and if you look online now for the newer advanced directives, they help answer a lot of these questions. If you go to the Maryland site, it's really, they have the copies of advanced directives, or your attorneys can help you walk through it, that it's more than just you have a terminal illness. The older advanced directives that many of us, last night I was thinking, I bet my advanced directives is that. It just says that if you have a terminal illness and 2 doctors confirm I have a terminal illness, I don't want extraordinary measures done, which is but that, like I said, the definition of what's a terminal illness is very broad, because you can live for a long time curled up in a nursing home not responding to your environment, but is that how you want to end your life? So absolutely, you need the written document, but the written document without the verbal, without the oral conversation, is much less powerful.
Yeah, hopefully the oral leads to the written.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Here we go. Having dealt with this with my family, my mother and my aunt, and they didn't want to make this decision. They didn't want to talk, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But one of the things that's hard is they feel like they're not going to have any control. And what I would say is, you still have control. You can still make your decisions.
Right.
And I would say that as long as you're alert and oriented, you can make your decision. Even if you have a diagnosis of some dementia, you still can be part of the conversation at that point. Right. And sometimes by being a nurse and being in the healthcare system, and I would observe, they'd come to me all the time.
Right.
And ask me, what does she want? What does she want? And I said, well, let's go ask her.
Right.
So the conversation is all along. It's doesn't end just when you sign the paper.
Right. It's continuing.
It's continuing.
It is a challenge for those of us who are clinicians, because we, by nature, go to the clinicians, which is the wrong thing to do. Because we're just going to talk, we have our own little language that we get into, and nobody else in the room understands what we're talking about. But it's not the thing to do for the patient, that's for sure.
They still want that control.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you a question about age, or the age appropriateness. When we filled out ours, we're just now turning 80. A couple of years ago, the physician said, well, do not resuscitate. Oh, that's too early. So do resuscitate. At age 95, we would have a different choice. Now, age obviously has, different connotations for everybody. So what is your take?
My take is, it's a good question. Age absolutely shouldn't be the determinant. If you're 92 and running up, doing exercises and going out and doing whatever you want to do at 92, and you have minor arrhythmia, that's an irregular heartbeat that can be fixed in a second, with a little shock, that might be appropriate for that patient. If you're 92 and you've got cancer, you got 17 other problems, but at 80, absolutely. If one of us, and I've had people my age say, and I'm so young, but you know, I do not resist. I don't want to. I said, I'm telling you, if I walk out here and accidentally step on an electric wire and collapse, please defibrillate me, because I'll be fine if I'm 80. So it's not even that we have to automatically put everybody at a certain age into DNR. But we need to know what it is. So if you come into the hospital and you are not going to recover to where you were before, what do you want us to do?
But even at 80, you can have a devastating stroke.
Yes.
And in that case,
Then you would change.
but by that time you cannot.
So that's why you have to have had this conversation, because you can't make the decision anymore, right? But hopefully your spokesperson says, we had this conversation, and if he can't be home, if he can't respond to the environment, this is not the life that he wants. So that's why, that's the conversation that's so important, because you can't make the decision anymore.
And everything's not gonna be in writing.
Maryland, can you put that DNR in the state we used to live in? The DNR had to be signed every time you entered the hospital.
The MOLST is actually a order that stays until another MOLST would be written. You can take away the MOLST, and the MOLST has DNR on.
Okay.
So in Maryland, and now in most of the states, there's POLST in other states.
Yeah.
Maryland had to not accept the same that the rest of the country. We had to make ours more complicated. But there's POLST around the country and MOLST here, but those are orders that do not expire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. So isn't it true also though that the Maryland Advanced Directive, which is a separate website, is a patient preference, and the MOLST is actually a physician's order, right? And that's really the difference.
Exactly. The advanced directive is the patient filling it out. The MOLST, which is supposed to be filled out with the patient participating, or whoever their designee is, but it is a physician who signs. The patient does not sign the MOLST at all. Yeah.
So just commend you for the questions in here.
Yes.
You can actually, there's another resource, 5 Wishes.
5 Wishes. There's a lot of resources.
You can actually turn that into an advanced directive.
Exactly. And the Maryland site has an excellent some tips too about how to have this conversation. There's great videos and stuff like that. If you go on the web trying to figure out how I'm going to start this conversation in my family when they say I don't want to talk about this. So I took that away from my family. I said that Thanksgiving and Christmas we're having these conversations.
Let's say you're an older person and you spell out everything you want crystal clear.
Right.
Do children have the right to overturn that?
It becomes, and now there's an increasing, in our hospital we've started an aggressive bioethics program. Because in the past, hospitals would be, this is gonna get into a litigation, they're gonna call the Washington Post, we're gonna be on the front of the Post, that they want us, they're sure that Dad is gonna be saved, even if we say his recovery would be unprecedented in medical history. But now we absolutely, and I know in our institution, we would take this to our ethics committee, say we're at a debate, the patient has clearly defined what they want, the child has emerged that's saying this, and we would go to the patient's wishes. We would support this and support the physicians, because the physicians and the staff are the ones that are at the bedside with the family who's accusing you of killing their loved one and all this stuff. It's a nasty thing, but we would defend the patient's desire. That if, in theory, if the family got 2 family members to say, I know Dad wrote that, but last week he told us, take that all back, then that's a different situation we could get into. We get into this sometimes with organ donation. Somebody writes no back 10 years ago, they didn't think about it, says no, but we can talk to two family members, say, no, they want to be an orthodox.
Is it possible to put in writing that your decision cannot be overridden by other family members?
I don't know that you shouldn't be able to override. Now, this is why telling more and more people in your family what your wishes are the important thing. And I don't know if the attorneys in the room could tell, I don't know that there's any way to write it absolutely ironclad. But I know our institution would defend the patient's decision. We would absolutely, and we do get, unfortunately, sometimes all of us, our families are not, perhaps there's family members that have issues, and they come and live with the older patient, and they can continue to live in that house while that older patient lives. And when the patient dies, that house is going to be sold as part of the estate. And so they have, and it's unfortunate, it's a terrible, terrible thing, where the motivation to keep this patient alive in a terrible situation is financial. And so again, if the patient has it, because this person then is telling us, no, they want to live this way. And we get into the bioethics. Yeah.
There's a Clarence Darrow quote. He says, your parents ruined the first half of your life, and your children ruined the second half.
Yeah. But and you'll see in the conversation project, it actually recommends to really think about who your decision maker is. It might be your friend. You need to tell and I don't trust you. My in-laws, my father-in-law just died. They have 5 kids. They're all lovely, and we get along. But they made me the decision maker. They said, we don't trust our kids to make the right decision. So I said, so you're saying I could knock you off? Oh, no. But they said, I don't think that they could stay without the emotion. So it could be that the person who's actually the right decision maker is not the legal next of kin. It could be a friend, a great friend. And once you spell that out, especially if you're worried about children who have very different ideas, then we will defend the patient's decision. We love that when we're being told that we're going to be on the front page of the Washington Post or whatever. but we mustered through it.
I think we could take one more question.
Yeah.
You have more brochures, we didn't get any.
Oh, did we run out?
They just didn't get to it.
Oh, they're still coming.
And
Yeah.
if we do run out, I can get the list from Steve and we will mail them out to all of you. So they can have and share them. This is a gift you can give a friend and help them do the same thing, pass it on.
We're on a mission to get this message out because it is so important and can change our community as people are more prepared when we have to make these decisions.
I think I can speak loud enough. Our insurance company has a scanned copy of their medical directives. Should the MOLST be part of that package?
You certainly could. The MOLST needs to be filled out with your physician, but it would absolutely. It's a physician order and they would send it with their other records. We don't have to have a MOLST unless you're moving between facilities. But the MOLST absolutely spells out, if you fill out the full MOLST, it spells out exactly what you want, and it's a physician order that stands until someone puts in a different order. So it's.
If I could ask a question,
Yep.
would you recommend the MOLST worksheet?
Right, it's the MOLST, it's that.
Would you recommend that everybody have a worksheet?
Because that's what's really the deeper discussion is the worksheet. If you go through that, it walks you through this. Let me think about hydration. Let me think about all the different aspects of this. So it takes you further into it. The first page of the MOLST says, I want to be resuscitated, I don't want to be resuscitated. The next pages are actually the more detail. But again, don't just do it in silence in your home and not tell anybody. You've got to force yourself to it's an uncomfortable conversation, but it is an absolute gift. I don't know how, being in critical care for so many years, how many times when I could go up to the spouse and say, your husband gave you a gift. He told you what decision to make here. And take that burden off of them as they're trying to figure out what to do in these devastating, when devastating, unexpected events have happened. It is a gift you give to your children and to your family. So anyway, you guys, I don't know if they have our emails, but if somebody thinks of it, if you have a group, you want us to come and talk more about the Conversation Project or a book club or whatever, we'll get somebody there to talk about it. We're that passionate about making sure that we get this message out.
And I'll offer one more thing. As I said, we are the leading hospital in terms of acute care for the elderly in this state. And one of the things that we have, which is actually donor supported, is a virtual dementia tour. So if you have a loved one who is in the throes or the beginning stages or extensive stages of dementia, it could be a close friend, it could be a spouse, it could be a parent, it could be a loved one of any kind. These are complimentary, we invite you, we'll let you know when the next one is, and you come and you actually experience, they're professionally and clinically guided, you experience what your loved one with dementia is going through. You actually have these blinding goggles on and these muffled earmuffs and things on your hands, and we ask you to do simple things like put a pot of water on the stove or get dressed. And you start to experience what your loved one with dementia is going through every day and why they're frustrated and why they're angry. And it helps you to understand how you can better care for them and support them. We do then a very significant clinical debrief afterwards, talking about what you've experienced, what they're experienced, how you can develop some better coping and caring mechanisms to care for your loved one with dementia. So I will open that up. It's a free program that we offer, and we'll get you our contact information. We welcome you to join us for one of those.
Anyway, thank you very much again.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Gary Greenwald. He wanted me to just say, here he is, Gary Greenwald, but I'm going to delve a little bit deeper. Gary Greenwald has been practicing law in Maryland for more than 35 years, with offices in Howard County, Prince George's County, and St. Mary's County. His practice consists primarily of estate planning, wills, trusts, trust settlements, probate, and business law. Mr. Greenwald is a member of the Estates and Trust section of the Maryland State Bar Association and has served on the board of directors of the Estate Planning Council of Suburban Maryland for 6 years, as well as served as its president for 2 years. Mr. Greenwald is an active member of the National Network of Estate Planning Attorneys. He is licensed to practice in both the state and federal courts of Maryland and the District of Columbia. Mr. Greenwald graduated with honors from the University of Maryland School of Law in 1977. In 1989, he earned a Master of Law degree in taxation from the George Washington University School of Law. Mr. Gary Greenwald, everybody.
So before we start, I have to tell you how impressed I was with the musical entertainment this morning. And they had mentioned that a part of their, of course, it was a quartet, but I saw 3 of them. They said that they have a trumpet player who wasn't here. And it brought back memories, because when I was in 8th grade, I started playing the trumpet. And after the director heard me play the trumpet, he said, you know, we have plenty of trumpet players. Why don't you learn how to play the French horn? So I figured I'd try the French horn because I wanted to make him happy. And so the following year when I went to high school, the first year I tried the French horn, I played for 1 year, and I had the distinction at Oxon Hill High School of being the only person in the marching band to be asked by the musical director, please, don't try out for it the next year. But I gotta tell you, I come from a musical family. My wife, Donna, is here. She's a very talented vocalist. She sung the national anthem in every major league ballpark in the country. I have a son who is a self-taught musician who's recorded 3 actually he's in the process of recording his 3rd album. And I have a daughter who actually majored in piano at West Virginia University for a year or 2. So when I heard the music this morning, it brought back a lot of pleasant, and I gotta tell you, unpleasant memories. So let me make sure I understand how this thing works, because I'm not a very technologically gifted person. Okay, that's not too hard. In 2015, the laws in Maryland changed dramatically when it comes to trusts. The Maryland Trust Act was enacted effective January 1 of 2015. It used to be, actually in every state in the country, if a husband and wife are married, and now if two spouses are married, the law afforded them a very unique creditor protection aspect, and that is that if a couple is married and a judgment is obtained against one of the spouses, for as long as they are married, a creditor cannot attach jointly held assets if you are married. It used to be in Maryland up until 2015, before the act was passed, that if a husband and wife took property that was formerly owned as husband and wife and put it into a living trust, you gave up that creditor protection. But effective January 1 of 2015, if you have language in the trust that says you'd like to keep that creditor protection, you get to keep it. So that actually made us probably the most trust-friendly state in the country. That law has not changed. It remains effective today. Another aspect of the Maryland Trust Act was that it used to be under Maryland law there were no statutes which required that beneficiaries be told of the contents of a trust when you died and what the assets were. And what the Maryland Trust Act did was it defined someone called a qualified beneficiary. A qualified beneficiary is a person who's going to inherit after somebody dies. And under this new statute, the law said that when a trust becomes irrevocable, or in plain English, when you die and the trust can no longer be amended, those people who are qualified beneficiaries are entitled to receive a notice from the trustee that you have died. The notice also says that they have a right to see the trust documents and all of the assets that are in the trust. So it really made the law now that a beneficiary is entitled to see what is in the trust. Effective, though, this year, that law has been modified. And now, if you have language in your trust, and this has become effective, by the way, I think October 1 of this year, if you have language in a trust, you can actually designate somebody else to receive notice on behalf of the qualified beneficiaries. What does that mean? It used to be that if you have beneficiaries, they are entitled to receive copies of the trusts and all the assets in the trust. And now, basically, if you want, you can create what I would call a secret trust. If you don't want your children or your grandchildren, dare I say this, a spouse, although I don't think that would work, to not know exactly what's in your trust, you can actually do that. I would suggest not making the spouse the subject of a secret trust. Let's see what's up here next. Okay. Effective 2015, the new Maryland Trust Act basically says that if you have language in a trust that says that you do not want the assets in the trust to be subject to the claims of creditors of the beneficiary, you can actually have that in the trust. It used to be the common law, or laws decided by judges. There was common law in Maryland, which basically said that if a beneficiary is sued, but the beneficiary has a trust that was set up by somebody else when that person died, the creditor could not attach the assets in the trust. Now there's a Maryland statute which says specifically that. So if you have children who are not that good with money, if you have children who may not be in the best marriage in the world and you may be concerned about divorce issues, or if you happen to be leaving assets to a spouse and you believe that maybe soon after you pass away, he or she may remarry, and you want to make sure the assets don't end up in the hands of a future spouse of your surviving spouse, you can create a trust to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now, I said earlier that under Maryland law, a creditor cannot attack a trust and attach the assets in it if they have a judgment against the creditor. But in the past year, a case was decided in the state of California, in a case called U.S. v. Harris, where the federal government had a lien against a beneficiary of a trust. And that the case that was decided basically said that if the federal government has a lien against a beneficiary, the federal government can attach not the trust assets, but distributions that come out of the trust. And that seems logical. So let's assume you set up a trust for a child, and the child has a judgment against them. The creditor cannot actually pierce through the trust and attach those assets to satisfy the judgment. But when you think about it, as the assets come out, a creditor would be able to attach those assets. So it's not a foolproof thing, but it certainly is a lot better than it was before. We know, again, in the Harris case, they were just trying to take assets as the assets were being distributed out of the trust. So that's not protected, but the assets that remain in the trust are. So let me ask you, if you are now the trustee of a trust for your brother or your sister or your child, and there's a judgment against them, and you know that the creditors are circling the wagons like vultures, what do? You decide not to make distributions out of the trust to the beneficiary until the dust settles. By the way, does anybody here know how long a judgment is good in Maryland? 12 years. 12 years, right? All right, and you can always renew it. So it's not a foolproof thing, but usually after 12 years, creditors basically forget. All right, it used to be in Maryland that if you are a child and you have a destitute parent, that a child can actually be required to pay some of the debts of the destitute parent. There was actually a $1,000 fine that could be assessed. That's no longer the case in Maryland. So if you happen to have parents who have money issues and you're the child, you can breathe a little bit safer. You will not be held responsible for the debts of a destitute parent. I don't know how relevant this may be to some of you, but if you are deciding to create a business and you have real estate and you want to create an LLC, that means a limited liability company, it's like a corporation, and you want to transfer assets or assign real estate into the LLC, as long as the LLC has only one owner and it's you, and you are the only owner of the real estate, you will not have to pay transfer or recordation taxes. There is a law in Maryland that talks about domestic partners. You could not, if you don't want to be married, you could still live together and have what's called a domestic partnership. This does not have to be a same-sex couple. It can be a man and a woman. If you are a domestic partner, but you're not married, and the first partner dies, there generally is an inheritance tax that is assessed to the surviving domestic partner, with the exception of real estate. Now, under the new law, contrary to the old law, you can prove a domestic partnership simply by showing maybe there was a joint bank account, maybe each of you appointed the other as beneficiaries of a will. It used to be that you actually had to have an affidavit between the domestic partners to prove the partnership. That is no longer the case. So if you are in a domestic partnership and you want to try and escape the inheritance tax that is assessed against property passing to the surviving domestic partner, and again, this only applies to real estate, you can show that with some type of a joint ownership with other assets. You can show that if each of you may be the beneficiary of life insurance policies, you don't necessarily need to have an affidavit under oath. One of the final changes in the law is that if you die without a will, or even if you do have a will, a surviving spouse is entitled to something called a spousal allowance. And basically what that means is this. When the first spouse dies, if there are creditors, the creditors are entitled to receive assets out of the probate estate if there's a probate. But the first $10,000 of assets actually can pass to the surviving spouse without having to worry that the creditors can attach that money. So basically it ensures it's going to be at least a minimal amount of an inheritance received by a surviving spouse. That amount is going to be going up to $40,000 as of this year. And that basically are the only changes in the laws related to estate planning and estate taxes and trusts in the state of Maryland. Other than that, if you've had your trusts done or your estate plans done in the last year or two, you're probably safe. However, the advantage of belonging to the client care program is you never know when the laws are going to change. One of the big things that that was proposed this year in the legislature, which it did not pass, is the following. When a spouse dies, there is something called an elective share. What that means is this. If assets are passing through probate, a surviving spouse has the absolute right to claim the greater of 1/3 of the estate of the probate of the deceased spouse, or whatever is left to him or her in a will. And so what many times clients will do, if it's a second marriage or the marriage is maybe on the rocks, is they ask an attorney, how can we possibly avoid that elective share? And it used to be up until 1981, attorneys would suggest to clients to use a living trust. And the reason is that if your assets are in a living trust and you die, the assets pass outside of probate. So that was one way of avoiding this elective share. In 1981, a case in Maryland came out called Nell versus Price, which basically said, it wasn't directly on point, but there was what's called dictum in the case, which basically suggested that if you put assets into a living trust or some type of another asset, you cannot avoid this elective share by doing that. Now, the case was not on point, and lawyers weren't quite sure if it would be binding if it came down to a contest. But at that point, lawyers started telling clients, you know, we have this case called Nell versus Price. We're not sure how it would apply in the case, but if you're trying to avoid the elective share, we cannot really guarantee that a living trust would avoid that. Then about 6 or 7 years ago, and I don't remember the name of the case, in a dicta also, which means that it does not necessarily mean that it's law, but it was a suggestion by a court as how it might rule, is that if you put assets into a living trust, you might be able to avoid the elective share on the basis that if the legislature wanted the elective share to be applied to a living trust, the legislature could have simply put that into the law, and that never has happened. In the last 2 years, legislation was proposed and discussed to state very specifically that the elective share should apply not only to probate assets, but all assets, life insurance policies, living trust assets. In both of those years, that did not pass. So as of today, I can tell you affirmatively that the law is very unsettled, and that if you're trying to make sure that your surviving spouse cannot take advantage of the elective share, there's no law on point in Maryland, but the last case that suggested one way or the other says that it might work, but don't count on it. So those are the changes to the law which have occurred since the last time I presented this presentation, which was about a year ago. So what's next on the schedule, Steve?
Mr. Mark Trent. Our featured speaker this morning is Mark Trent. He is a healthcare and Medicare specialist and founder of his company, Medicare Supplement Services. After many years in retail management, Mr. Trent found himself in a new occupation in the health insurance industry, where he discovered he had a gift for understanding insurance products and how to present them in a way that made sense to the layman. For over 10 years, he sold health insurance policies on the individual market, primarily to self-employed individuals. After the Affordable Care Act was enacted in 2010, through investigation and a recommendation from a colleague, he shifted his focus to the Medicare supplement industry and found his calling. Mr. Trent started Medicare Supplement Services in 2010 and now has close to 1,400 Medicare clients. His business model is to educate seniors on how Medicare works, what supplement plan is best for their circumstances with the lowest premium, and to facilitate the setup of a Medicare Part D plan, the prescription drug plan, the most complicated part of Medicare. His wife Debbie and he have been happily married 30 years, have 2 Doberman Pinschers, Elton and Isla.